The premise I've had on this show is simply why are governments taking a stand on sexuality? Okay, so you just described some very horrific parts of history, but today now it's the reverse where they're trying to push these ideas on the children. And so if you attempt to just protect your kids from this overt sexualized agenda, they malign the parents as being prejudicial or something of that sort. The premise I've had since the beginning is governments should not take a position on sexuality in general. They shouldn't be doing what happened in the European society back in the time you were speaking of, and they shouldn't be out here shoving it in our faces at the same time.
Absolutely. Let me give this a different position, especially when you come from a conservative position. It sounds like we are against. And I want to say that one thing that I'm after is, and I'm going to be creating a podcast now, and I finally decided after 6 months of being on social media, I was not really on social media prior to this year because of my book. And by the way, the book I've written is Killer Tech and the Drive to Save Humanity. And it's available everywhere. And I'm very proud of that. I'm a first-time author, and I got picked up by all the retailers, and that's pretty significant. So this is the deal. In Killer Tech, I really come up with some premises that I think are very important, and I would like to now discuss the big one. The big one is, look, guys, I don't want to control your life, and I do not want to come into your bedroom and tell you you can watch porn or not watch porn. But what has happened is we've lost our common sense in our debates. We've become literally aggressive in trying to prove our points. We're not open anymore to each other talking about what is really maybe a better way. Instead, what we're saying is, you want to take my rights away. So this is what's so amazing. In America, since I have lived here, and I immigrated to America, now almost 30 years ago. So I'm an immigrant from England, and I became a U.S. citizen, all legal, 15 years it took to do so. So I went from a student visa to an immigrant visa to a green card to a citizenship. America is one of the most amazing countries in the world. This is the most open country I've ever been to. Europe is not open. Sorry, it is not. You think that Sweden's open, you think that some of these countries that have this glorification of maybe they have a street in which they honor pornography. Wait until you live there and you have to work there and you have to pay their taxes and you have to deal with their rules of setting up business. They're not open. This country, America, is the most open country in the world. We do more for opening our hearts for every nationality and every creed and every gender. And yet we don't give ourselves credit. Why? Because we have a voracious media that hypes everything. So what's amazing to me is I actually have a daughter that identifies as a lesbian, and basically she feels that she's constantly under attack by society. And she wants to move to states where she feels more comfortable, because in her life, this is a truth to her. But then I keep asking her, where do you feel this hostility from? And then she shows me her feeds. And it's from her feeds. It's literally social media showing her every day that people are out to get her. And so ultimately her worldview is surrounded with people after her because of her preference. I'm sad by that, because that's really not a reflection of American society. I really don't believe it is. I believe there are bad apples in every sector. There are people that are homophobes. There are people that love gays, and there are people in between. But I don't believe we have a country of haters. I have not seen it, and there's no evidence of that. In fact, when you look at the evidence of even the riots and how big this country is more put together on each day than any other country in the world. And you wouldn't think it by the media, but I can prove it with stats. When you look at the overall states, we get more stuff done in this country than any other country on planet Earth. And I'm talking to you as an executive, as a CTO, as going around this country and looking at what we can do, from building capital projects. This country is amazing. And yet, we have our kids thinking this country's out to get them. That's because their feeds and their funnels keep showing them that. And we're highlighting to those kids the top 2 or 3% asses in this society that are doing these things instead of promoting the 97% of great people. That's because our social media promotes the negative, not the best of our society. And if we were in China, the same social media would be promoting the very best of their society and showing these kids how much their country loves them. And it would be wonderful if our social media would actually show these kids how much this society needs them, loves them, and needs them to succeed.
The theory is critical theory. It's a Marxist theory. It comes out of the Frankfurt School in Frankfurt, Germany from about 100 years ago, from about the time that Magnus Hirschfeld was in Frankfurt, Germany, also implementing the left's sexual agenda. It's all from that nucleus core of Marxists in Frankfurt, Germany about 100 years ago. And it's the idea to constantly be critical of every part of society and of the people in the society. And the intent of critical theory was to break down and destroy the family unit. One example of it is in Katy, Texas, in our Katy Independent School District. The Katy School Board passed a rule that said that should a child go to a teacher, an administrator, a professional at the school, an employee of the school, and discuss their sexuality, that school employee is to bring that information to the parents immediately. And what happened is the left protested. And what did they do? They bastardized the parents. They said, the parents, they started citing murder rates and child abuse rates, and they made the people of Katy, Texas, the parents in Katy, Texas, look like absolute monsters. And it's a maligning of an innocent people for a political agenda.
So I want the audience to think about this. Take that story, that what happened in Texas and the school teacher. How many cases do you think's happened around this country of parents murdering their kids over their sexual preference? Maybe one case in the whole history of America. But the media and the funnel suggests to my daughter and everyone else that this is happening all the time in every state, and there are haters everywhere. You see, that's an amplification. And that is why the Rand Corporation created this concept of truth decay in the 70s, which we are right now in one of the worst portions of truth decay in this country's history. Truth decay is when people don't believe in their government, and they don't believe in the media, and they don't believe in the authority figures. And right now, guess what? Government and authority figures, on average, poll at 17%. 17. That's terrible. So when you think about that, that means that none of us trust our elected officials. But my question is it we don't trust the elected officials, or have we been hyped and have we been with our media so pounded on with whatever their agenda is that we no longer know the true facts? And I would suggest that most probably 90% of Americans do not have access to real information, real news, and they actually do not know what is going on in the world.
So I want to circle back to the statistic that you gave. In England, as I understand, you said that homosexuals were being castrated up until 1965. We discussed that the narrative coming from the establishment is always to malign the everyday average people, the citizens of the country. And who was ever doing those gross mutilations, I don't believe it was the people of England. I don't believe that everyday commoners and everyday residents in England wanted to physically mutilate people. I think the common man's a good person. Now, who would be doing that sort of stuff? I don't know the story, but I don't think it was the neighbors and the commoners in England. So again, I think that when we hear these stories, we always feel a sense of guilt because we are all good people and we have a sense of pride and community, and we look at it as a reflection on us. But I think it's time to start thinking cynically and critically and start maybe pointing the finger back to the establishment, to the people that have a political agenda, because normal people do not do these heinous acts. I don't know the whole story, but that's just my quick thought on it.
We have that old adage, follow the money, is absolutely true in this situation. It's very simple. Anything to do with gender and sexuality, and when you're selling new products around that, and especially surgeries and medical procedures, there's a lot of money to be made. Transgenderism in America is a multi-billion-dollar business, and it's increasing every year. It's a very dangerous business because, guys, listen, when you change your hormones in your body, it's usually a one-way street, and you do not regain those functions back. If you're a man and you start taking estrogen and all the other chemicals, and you stop producing sperm, you probably will never produce sperm again. Now, there are some reversals, but what happens if you had a change of heart? So I'm not suggesting don't do the surgery, but I'm suggesting you do it when you're 21 or 25, when you've actually figured out you really want this. But what happens if you do it when you're 18 to be cool and then you can't reverse it? So I think doctors that are doing these operations on young kids below 18 are charlatans. I think they're just doing it for profit, and I think they're doing it to get exposure, because I would think it'd be far better to give those kids, forgive me, silicone boobs and let them wear, whatever they wanted to wear until they're 18, try it out. They can dress as a girl, they can do whatever they want. But once you mutate the body, you've gone to a whole new extreme. So my question is, we do all kinds of things. We tell people if you're taking a serious medicine, taper the medicine. So why don't we taper the surgeries? So we first try them out on prosthetics that they can take off. They see if they like it. And if that all works out, then when they're 18, you do it. But I think any surgery before you're 18 at 12, are you kidding me? That offends me.
You are really, I think, hitting some really important points. I go back to this story of Chloe, who I met a couple of years ago in an event. And her story was that as a 12-year-old, she was, tall and, she was athletic and didn't feel very feminine. Somehow they got her into the counselors. The counselors got her to the doctors. The doctors began to inject her at 12. They did a double mastectomy at 13. At 16, Chloe said, wait a minute, I don't want to be a boy. Why are you doing this? And, of course, her parents were told the now famous phrase, you can have a live son or a dead daughter, but if we don't perform these surgeries, your child is likely to kill themselves. Now, the statistics show that children that get the surgeries may be more likely to kill themselves. So that is simply an intimidation technique. And I think you're right. There's the money piece. I also think there's ideology. If you go today to The Advocate, their top article is 2 years after Dobbs, the White House warns of Republicans' assaults on Americans' bodily autonomy. First of all, an incredibly complex sentence to say what they're trying to say. That's a headline. They have to use so many euphemisms that they make their stories almost coded. And then there's one below that. U.S. Supreme Court will decide whether transgender kids have a right to access gender-affirming care. Now, that's a mouthful. That is an incredibly convoluted statement. But the point they're saying is that children should have the ability to decide, even without parental consent, to cut off their genitals and take these chemicals. And that is what they're saying. So there's an ideology blended with a profit motive, because there's plenty of money for these surgeries. And suddenly you've got an industry that's harming children. I think what you're hitting on is right. I'll give you one other anecdote. Someone that I know very well is a man now in his 70s, gay, traveled the world with me and my family. Great guy, very close. But over time, being exposed to this kind of media, he came to me finally one day and said, Republicans were hunting gays and wanted to kill them. And I was astonished. I said, well, where do you see this? Where has this happened? Of course, it's never happened. There was no one saying it. All of it came from this hyped-up media and social media that pushes these radical ideas that aren't based in any kind of fact. It is simply fear-mongering for clicks, fear-mongering for ideology.
So let's go back. You have 1,000 programmers that their sole mission is to keep your eyeballs on the target. If you want to keep the eyeballs on the target, you're also trying to sell stuff. So you have this whole new sexual category that's opened up a whole new set of merchandise, transgenderism. And in the last 20 years, that market has increased, and you can check these statistics out, by billions. The last time I looked, the surgeries, just the surgeries, have gone up by 1.2 billion to 2.4 billion last time I checked. That's insane. So if you take those surgeries, just the surgeries alone, this is worldwide statistics, and you can find these from Swedish stats, what is occurring is that we have now got an increase in demand on social media to support those ads. So that means they're going to be pushing more of this. So I want parents to realize, of course, they're going to be making arguments to make sure they don't stop advertising, because they want to keep their advertising on the air, so they're going to justify that they're not doing any harm. So, guys, just really quick, I don't want to monopolize this discussion, but I want people to realize how this works. Cigarettes. So cigarettes came about, and at first it was super pushed. Then the industry, do you remember, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s were pushing that's not that bad. They would find any way, and any scientist, and any way to actually slow down the progress of the information cigarettes kill you. It only took us 50 years to really get cigarettes banned out of public places, but we never banned it completely. So the thing is, this is a slow progression because we've got two armies competing against each other. We've got the army that wants to make money, that's making lots of money, and they're pushing to keep the product on. And we've got the other army, which is us, which is a soft army that doesn't realize what's going on, and we're slowly coming to the battlefield. And it usually takes 30 years to move a mass of people in a course. Soft drinks is the same. I can prove my point. It took us 30 years to really understand how bad sugar was and high fructose corn syrup, right? You guys know this. I mean, 30 years. You can keep saying something and no one listens. And then one day, it all starts to evolve, and then suddenly society picks it up. So I'm suggesting to all of us, this is going to be a long war. We're in the first 10 years of it. And I think we've got another 20 years of convincing to do to get this whole society to wake up and go, we've had enough. Profiting on kids' innocence is gross. The problem with sexuality throughout the whole age is that sexuality has always been two things. It is a weapon for the government to use, always has been, and it's also been usually used for leverage. Now, leverage can be profit, or leverage could be the Roman Empire. Let's go back to the Romans. The Romans' decay of their empire in the last 500 years, they lasted 500 years, but in the last 100 years of their empire, they heavily got into homosexuality, especially in Rome, where basically it started to be considered much more important of a social, a social badge than if you were heterosexual. It became extremely popular. If you were a nobility member, you would have a gay boyfriend, etc., etc. This is all in the history books. So what happened to the society once they decided that everything was open? Well, eventually what happened is that nothing was closed, so no one actually believed in anyone anymore, and they had an absolute moral decay in their traditional values, and they no longer knew what Roman was. So literally the society melted. You can check this all out. It was just a slow decay to nothing. And America right now is actually really assaulting the family, and we're actually taking our foundation and we're eroding it with this whole premise of how open we want to be. I hate to say this to people because they hate this. We all hate this. But rules and regulations and following a group and a team is important to keep a society together. You have to have some rules and you have to have some team elements to keep it all working. And together we can become more powerful, but separate we can be divided and conquered. Over this sexual issue, we're being conquered and divided, and I'm sad about that. We need to come together, and I plan to bring this debate to everyone. I want every homosexual and every gay person to come forward. Let's have a chat, and let's figure out how to protect the children and also not jeopardize what you feel you're so jeopardized by.